Caroline Levitt, known for her sharp intellect and unwavering composure, took on Dr. Collier, a seasoned skeptic, in a debate at Harvard. When logic and reason clashed with faith and human resilience, the outcome was more than anyone expected. The grand lecture hall at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard was filled to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. Students, professors, and journalists lined the rows, laptops open, cameras rolling, ready to witness what had been billed as one of the most thought-provoking debates of the year. At the center of it all sat Caroline Levitt, a rising political voice known for her unapologetic views on faith, leadership, and American values. Across from her was Dr. Nathan Collier, a seasoned Harvard professor and prominent secularist, whose career had been built on dismantling ideological arguments with ruthless precision. The debate, titled "Faith and Leadership: Is There a Place for Belief in Modern Governance?", was expected to be a clash of ideology versus intellect, tradition versus progress. For years, Dr. Collier had dismissed faith as an outdated relic, something he believed had no place in rational discourse. Caroline, on the other hand, had long argued that faith wasn't about control, it was about resilience, morality, and the unseen force that shapes great leaders. The moderator introduced both speakers, laying out the evening's ground rules before stepping aside. As the applause settled, Dr. Collier leaned forward, his expression sharp, his pen tapping lightly against the desk, a signal that he was ready to strike. Caroline met his gaze, her posture poised but calm. She had faced tough debates before, but something about this one felt different. This wasn't just about politics or policy. This was about the very essence of belief itself. And as the first question was posed, the entire room braced itself, because this was going to be a debate that no one would forget. Dr. Nathan Collier adjusted his glasses, his sharp gaze scanning the audience before turning back to Caroline Levitt. His reputation as an unshakable debater had been earned through years of dismantling arguments with ruthless logic, and tonight would be no different. He leaned slightly forward, tapping his pen against the polished wooden desk, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Caroline," he began, his tone measured but laced with skepticism, "you've built much of your platform around the idea that faith plays a crucial role in leadership and governance. But let's be honest, faith is declining, fewer people believe in organized religion, and society has, by and large, moved toward a more secular, evidence-based approach to solving real-world problems. So, I have to ask, why do you insist that faith still matters?" The room was silent, the audience watching closely for Caroline's response, but Dr. Collier wasn't finished. "You speak about faith as though it's an asset," he continued, gesturing slightly with his hands. "But history tells a different story. Faith has been used to justify war, oppression, and discrimination, and now, in a world driven by science, data, and progress, clinging to outdated religious ideals only slows us down. Why should anyone, put their trust in something that has failed so often?" There was a murmur through the crowd, a mixture of approval and unease. Collier had set the tone for the debate, framing faith not as a guiding force, but as a relic of the past, one that, in his view, had done more harm than good. He folded his hands together, watching Caroline closely, waiting for her to stumble or for the cracks in her argument to show. But Caroline didn't flinch. Instead, she let the question linger in the air for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just been asked. She could feel the tension in the room, the expectation that she would either defend faith with theological platitudes or struggle against the tide of logic Collier had unleashed. She did neither. Instead, she took a slow breath, glanced at the audience, then turned back to Collier with a quiet confidence. "That's an interesting argument," she said, "but I have just one question for you, Dr. Collier. What do people turn to when science doesn't have an answer?" And with that, the entire room held its breath. Caroline Levitt let the weight of her question settle in the room. Dr. Collier remained silent for a beat too long, clearly not expecting to be challenged in such a direct yet composed manner. The audience shifted, some leaning forward in their seats, sensing that the debate had just taken an unexpected turn. Caroline's expression remained calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her gaze as she continued. "You ask why faith still matters," she said, her voice steady, "but the mistake you're making is assuming that faith is nothing more than a belief system, something confined to churches, rituals, and traditions. That's where the disconnect happens. Because faith isn't just about what we believe, it's about what sustains people when nothing else can." She let that sit for a moment before continuing, her tone unwavering. "You mentioned science and data," she said, nodding toward Dr. Collier. "And I'm not here to argue against either of those. Science saves lives, technology drives progress, and reason allows us to make sense of the world. But tell me this. When a mother is sitting beside her dying child in a hospital bed, and the doctors have no more treatments left to offer, what does she hold on to? When a man loses everything in a natural disaster, his home, his livelihood, what gives him the strength to start over?" A hush fell over the audience. Collier opened his mouth slightly as if to interject, but Karoline pressed on. "Hope," she answered for him. "Strength? The belief that there is something beyond the suffering, beyond the pain. Faith is not about rejecting progress. It's about the thing that carries people through when progress alone isn't enough." She glanced around the room, locking eyes with a few audience members before turning back to Collier. "History has shown us the worst of what people can do in the name of faith, and I won't deny that," she acknowledged. "But it has also shown us the best of what people are capable of when they are driven by it. The abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, countless charities, hospitals, and humanitarian efforts, all founded and led by people who believed that their faith called them to do more, to be better." She leaned forward slightly. "So tell me, Dr. Collier, if faith is obsolete, why does it continue to be the foundation that people turn to in their darkest moments?" Dr. Collier, a seasoned academic, adjusted his microphone, preparing to counter Karoline Levitt's argument. He was used to dominating debates, especially on faith's role in modern society. But Karoline had framed faith differently, not as doctrine, but as a force that carried people through their darkest moments. And that, he admitted to himself, was not easily refuted. He exhaled, lacing his fingers together before leaning forward. His voice was deliberate. "Karoline, I respect your argument, and I can't deny the emotional weight behind it. You say faith is what people turn to when there's nothing left. But isn't that just desperation? Isn't faith simply a last resort, something people cling to when they are out of options, when they need anything to make sense of the chaos?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Collier had reframed faith as an emotional crutch rather than a lasting force. "I'll go further," he continued. "Faith has been used as a mechanism of control. Wars have been waged in its name. Science has been suppressed by it. Entire populations have been manipulated through religious dogma. If faith is so powerful, why has it so often divided rather than united? Why should faith dictate leadership when we have reason, logic, and measurable progress?" The challenge hung heavy. Some audience members nodded in agreement, while others sat frozen, waiting to see how Karoline would respond. It was a question designed to corner her, forcing her to defend faith's misuses or admit belief alone wasn't enough. But Karoline did not flinch. She let the silence stretch just long enough to create anticipation. Then, with a composed smile, she said, "Dr. Collier, you bring up a valid concern, but let me ask you something in return. When has reason alone ever been enough to save the human soul?" The room went still. The debate had just shifted. Karoline Levitt took a steady breath, letting the silence settle before she spoke. She knew that faith couldn't always be explained through facts and logic. Sometimes it had to be felt, and in that moment, she needed to remind the room why faith mattered beyond history and intellectual debates. "Dr. Collier, I appreciate your perspective, but let me share a story with you, one that speaks to the heart of what faith truly is." She paused. 12 years ago, I met a woman named Margaret Dawson. She wasn't a scholar or a public figure, but she had more wisdom than most people I've ever met. She glanced at the audience, pulling them in. Margaret was 72 years old when I met her. She had lived a life most of us would struggle to comprehend. She had buried 2 sons, one lost to cancer, the other to a tragic accident. Her husband of 40 years had passed from a stroke. She had no siblings, no immediate family left. By all accounts, she should have been broken. She should have been bitter. She should have given up. Karoline let the weight of those words sink in before continuing. And yet, when I sat across from her in a small church outreach program, she smiled like she carried no burdens at all. I asked her how she found the strength to wake up every morning after losing so much. And do you know what she told me? She looked directly at Dr. Collier. She said, "Faith isn't about proof, it's about what keeps you standing when there is no proof." The room was silent. Margaret didn't have studies to justify her belief, but she had survived suffering that would break most people, and still, she chose kindness. She chose to believe her pain wasn't the end of her story, and that strength didn't come from logic, it came from faith. Karoline leaned forward. "Dr. Collier, you asked why faith has been used to divide, but I ask you, where does that leave the Margarets of the world? Where does that leave the people who have lost everything and still find a reason to hope? Faith isn't about control, it isn't about power, it's about the human spirit, about resilience, about surviving the impossible and choosing to believe in something greater than our suffering. That is why faith still matters." A ripple of emotion moved through the audience. For the first time, Dr. Collier looked thoughtful rather than confrontational, and Karoline had just won more than an argument. She had touched something deeper. Dr. Collier had spent years dismantling arguments with cold logic, but as Karoline's words settled over the room, something shifted. His usual confidence wavered, not in outright defeat, but in something more telling: hesitation. His fingers, once tapping against the table in rhythm, suddenly stilled. He exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words with unusual care. The audience sensed it immediately. Until now, Collier had steered the debate onto intellectual ground where he thrived. But Karoline's story of Margaret Dawson introduced something logic couldn't counter: an undeniable human truth. No matter how rational someone claimed to be, no one was immune to suffering, and when suffering comes, people don't turn to cold reason, they turn to something deeper. Collier cleared his throat. "Karoline, that's a compelling story, and I won't deny that people like Margaret find solace in faith. But personal experience, no matter how powerful, doesn't prove the existence of a higher power." He hesitated. "People survive suffering for all kinds of reasons. Some turn to faith, yes, but others turn to family, to science, to human resilience. Why must faith be the answer?" Karoline studied him, letting the moment stretch. Then she spoke, her voice unwavering. "Dr. Collier, you just proved my point. You said people turn to something: faith, family, resilience. But what is resilience if not faith in something? Faith that life will go on. Faith that tomorrow will be better. Faith that love and meaning can still exist even after the worst pain imaginable. You can call it human resilience, but it comes from the same place. And that's why faith is not obsolete." A murmur rippled through the audience. Collier opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he wasn't entirely sure what to say next. The debate may have ended when the cameras stopped rolling, but its impact was just beginning. Within hours, clips of Karoline Levitt's exchange with Dr. Collier flooded social media. The moment she asked, "Where does that leave the Margarets of the world?" struck a nerve. The hashtag, "Faith Still Matters," trended for days as people from all backgrounds engaged in the conversation. What set this debate apart wasn't just the topic, it was the tone. It wasn't an aggressive takedown or a political spectacle. It was an exchange that made people stop and reflect. Even skeptics admitted they were moved. One journalist tweeted, "I don't consider myself religious," but Karoline Levitt didn't win that debate in the traditional sense. She reminded us why faith exists in the first place. A well-known podcaster, often critical of religion, admitted, "I don't know if faith is for me, but I get why people need it." News outlets quickly picked up the story. Conservative networks praised Karoline's conviction, while even neutral and left-leaning commentators acknowledged the moment's significance. Some analysts debated whether this marked a shift in the role of faith in public discourse. Meanwhile, Dr. Collier, usually quick to issue rebuttals, remained unusually quiet. His only statement was brief. I went into that debate expecting to challenge beliefs. I left with more questions than I anticipated. When asked about the debate, Karoline didn't frame it as a personal victory. She simply said, "I wasn't trying to win an argument, I was trying to remind people why faith, whether in God, in hope, or in each other, still matters." And perhaps that was why the conversation refused to fade. A week after the debate, Karoline Levitt sat in her office, sorting through the flood of emails and letters. Many were messages of encouragement, gratitude, and personal reflections. But one letter stood out. It was handwritten, postmarked from a small town in Illinois, and simply addressed to Karoline Levitt. "Thank you." She unfolded the note and read the carefully written words. "Dear Karoline, I don't usually write letters like this, but after watching your debate, I had to. I'm not religious. I haven't been to church in decades. But something you said about faith being what keeps people standing stuck with me. 2 years ago, I lost my wife suddenly. It broke me. I shut down, cut off friends, work, even my kids. Nothing mattered anymore. But when you spoke about Margaret Dawson, about how she found the strength to wake up each day despite her losses, I saw what I could be. For the first time in years, I don't feel alone. Your words made me believe in something again, not necessarily in God, but in hope, in purpose, in tomorrow. So thank you. You didn't just win a debate, you gave someone like me a reason to take another step forward." Karoline exhaled, gripping the letter. This wasn't about politics or winning arguments. It was about something real. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. Some debates fade with the news cycle. This one would last. Then something unexpected happened. Dr. Collier himself responded. Known for his sharp critiques, no one expected him to reconsider his stance. Yet, in an Atlantic op-ed, he stunned supporters and critics alike. "In all my years of debate, few arguments have made me pause. Karoline Levitt did. It wasn't her statistics or rhetoric, it was her story. Faith, for many, is not about proving truth, but about finding strength when truth alone isn't enough. I remain a skeptic, but I'd be dishonest if I said the conversation didn't move me. Margaret Dawson's story made me question something I had dismissed. What keeps people standing when everything else is gone? Maybe there is more to faith than I once believed." The article spread quickly, drawing praise and criticism, but for Karoline, one thing was clear. This debate had planted a seed of reflection, even in the most unexpected places. As Karoline Levitt sat in her office, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating Dr. Collier's op-ed, she felt a deep sense of validation, not for winning a debate, but for sparking a conversation that mattered. The Harvard debate had begun as just another engagement, yet it had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about reminding people that faith wasn't just doctrine or ritual. It was resilience, hope, and the unseen force that kept people going in their darkest hours. Collier's response wasn't a full concession, but it didn't need to be. He had acknowledged something beyond logic, something that couldn't be measured in studies. That alone was enough. Karoline thought of Margaret Dawson, the woman whose story had shaped her own understanding of faith, and wondered how many others carried unseen burdens, longing for something to hold on to. The true power of faith, Karoline realized, wasn't in proving it to others, but in living it. In a world obsessed with winning arguments, the most lasting impact came from planting seeds. Seeds of thought, kindness, and belief in something greater. Some would take root immediately, others might lie dormant for years, but none would be wasted. As she closed her laptop, preparing for another engagement, she carried a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation would continue far beyond her, beyond Collier, beyond a single debate. And that was the greatest victory of all. Faith had never been about having all the answers. It had always been about having the courage to ask the right questions. The story of Karoline Levitt's debate with Dr. Collier teaches an important lesson. Faith is not about proving something to others. It's about what sustains people in their hardest moments. In a world that often prioritizes logic, evidence, and intellectual arguments, this debate served as a reminder that some of the most profound human experiences, grief, resilience, hope, cannot always be explained by reason alone. Karoline's response resonated because she didn't rely on statistics or abstract theories. She shared a real story, one that highlighted faith as a source of strength rather than mere belief. Margaret Dawson's unwavering resilience after loss demonstrated that faith isn't about control or blind obedience, but about finding meaning and purpose even when life feels unbearable. Dr. Collier, a lifelong skeptic, may not have walked away with a complete change of heart, but the debate planted a seed of reflection, proving that genuine conversations can challenge even the most rigid perspectives. The lesson is clear. Faith, in any form, isn't just about religion. It's about the human need for hope, for something greater than ourselves. And sometimes simply opening the door to that conversation can be more powerful than winning any debate.